18th, 1945. A quiet morning across southern Germany. The gunfire had stopped. The banners of the Reich were gone, and the endless columns of defeated soldiers stretched across the countryside. Among them were not just men, but women. Thousands of German female auxiliaries, nurses, clerks, and communication staff had surrendered to the advancing American forces. Many of these women had lived through the collapse of their world. Cities reduced to rubble, families lost, and hunger everywhere. They had been taught to fear the Allies, to believe that capture meant humiliation or worse. Nazi propaganda had painted the Americans as merciless conquerors. So, when the U.S. Army trucks arrived to transport them to prison camps, most were silent, trembling, expecting cruelty. But what awaited them was something no one could have predicted. The convoy rolled through Bavaria, past destroyed bridges and burned-out villages. Inside one of the trucks sat 20 young women, some still in faded Wehrmacht uniforms, others in civilian clothes. Their faces were streaked with dust and exhaustion. One woman, a former nurse from Hamburg named Lise, whispered, "If they send us to Russia, we'll never come back." Another, barely 19, began to cry silently. When they finally arrived at the U.S. camp, they braced themselves. Guards with rifles stood by the gates, but there were no shouts, no blows, no snarling dogs. Instead, an American officer climbed onto the truck and, through a translator, calmly said, "You are now under the protection of the United States Army. No harm will come to you." Those words were the first sign that everything they'd been told was a lie. Inside the camp, they saw clean barracks, wooden huts lined with bunks, blankets folded neatly. There were wash areas, water pumps, and a small field kitchen where U.S. soldiers were preparing food. The smell of coffee and warm bread drifted through the air. One of the women whispered, "It smells like home." For the first time in months, they were given real meals, soup with meat, bread, potatoes, and even chocolate. They stared at their bowls. Many had been surviving on grass and rotten vegetables in the final weeks of the war. An American guard motioned for them to eat. Slowly they began, spoonful by spoonful, until hunger overcame fear. Later that night, as they lay on clean straw mattresses, several of the women began to cry quietly. They had expected punishment, but found humanity instead. One of them later wrote in her diary, "We thought we would die in shame. Instead, we were treated like human beings." The U.S. military's treatment of German POWs, especially women, was guided by the Geneva Convention. American camps were not perfect. Overcrowding and shortages existed, but compared to the chaos in Europe, they were an island of order. Guards were instructed to treat prisoners with respect, discipline, and fairness. The women quickly noticed. Camp Heilbronn, female POWs were organized into small work groups, cooking, laundry, and camp maintenance. They were paid small wages in camp currency, redeemable for extra rations or soap. A few even volunteered as translators or nurses for sick prisoners. The Americans, surprised by their diligence, began to trust them with more responsibilities. Soon, life inside the camp developed a strange rhythm. Every morning, the American flag was raised, and the women stood silently, watching it wave against the blue German sky. To them, it symbolized both defeat and strange safety. Outside the fences, the world was starving. Inside, there was food, water, and shelter. A captured German typist named Erika later said in an interview, "For us, the American camp was paradise. We had beds, showers, and no fear. We could sleep through the night without bombs." One afternoon, an American sergeant brought a group of children orphans found wandering near a ruined village into the camp. The German women immediately took to them, washing their clothes and feeding them from their rations. The Americans watched quietly, realizing that beneath the uniforms and language, these enemies were just people trying to survive. Friendships began to form in small, silent ways. Some guards shared cigarettes or candy. Others learned a few German words, Danke, Guten Morgen, and laughed when they were mispronounced. The women, once terrified, began to smile. There were rules, of course, curfews, roll calls, strict boundaries, but even within those limits, a sense of dignity returned. The Americans didn't tolerate abuse. When one guard insulted a prisoner, he was reassigned within a day. Word spread fast. The Americans followed their own code of honor outside the camps. The contrast was stark. In areas occupied by other Allied forces, especially the Soviets, captured German women often faced horrific treatment, assault, forced labor, and starvation. News of that spread through whispers and smuggled letters. Many women inside U.S. zones felt an overwhelming sense of relief. One diary entry read, "Every morning, I thank God we fell into American hands." Over time, the camps began offering educational programs. U.S. Army officers brought in teachers and chaplains to give lessons in English, basic math, and even history. Some women attended eagerly, hoping to prepare for a future beyond war. Others wrote home letters. The Americans often helped deliver through the Red Cross. A few months later, as the seasons turned, the camps began releasing some of the women. Many wept as they left. They had no homes to return to, their cities destroyed, their families gone. But they carried with them memories of decency in the midst of devastation. The years after the war, countless memoirs from German women surfaced, describing their time in American custody. Most carried the same message: gratitude. "They gave us food, treated us fairly, and never shamed us," one wrote. Another described seeing American nurses tending to German wounded men, saying they cared for them as if they were their own. The most famous quote came from a woman who had served as a communications clerk. Interviewed in 1947, she said with tears in her eyes, "The American camps were paradise. I cannot explain it any other way. What made it feel like paradise wasn't luxury, it was the contrast. After years of fear, bombing, and indoctrination, simple decency felt like a miracle. A warm meal, clean sheets, a smile from a guard. These things rebuilt a sense of humanity that war had crushed." For the American soldiers, many of whom had lost friends on the battlefield, it wasn't easy either. Some had deep resentment toward Germany, but discipline held them back from cruelty. Many understood that punishing civilians or prisoners wouldn't bring their comrades back. The U.S. Army's moral code demanded something higher. An American lieutenant stationed near Nuremberg later said, "We had seen enough death. Maybe showing kindness was our way to end the war properly." That kindness had ripple effects. When post-war Germany began to rebuild, countless former POWs remembered how they were treated. They spoke about fairness, democracy, and freedom, ideas they had experienced for the first time behind barbed wire. In American-run camps, by 1946, most female German prisoners were released. Some found work with Allied reconstruction teams, translating documents, teaching language, or nursing war victims. Others married American soldiers after the war, relationships born out of those first fragile months of peace. Years later, when historians studied the post-war reconciliation between Germany and the United States, they found countless small stories, names lost, faces forgotten, but one message repeated again and again: the Americans treated us as people in a world still scarred by brutality that mattered. The memory of those days lived on, not in official reports, but in personal letters, faded photographs, and fragile smiles captured by U.S. Army photographers. One photograph, taken in the summer of 1945, shows a young German woman in a patched uniform standing at the camp fence. An American soldier hands her a small bar of chocolate. Both are smiling. Behind them, the war is over, at least for a moment. Decades later, survivors of those camps would still describe it the same way, not as imprisonment, but as awakening. The German women who once feared their captors would later teach their children that mercy is stronger than hate. One wrote in her final diary entry, "They could have broken us. Instead, they showed us kindness, and that changed everything."